Hepiniz hoş geldiniz İstanbul Bilgi Üniversitesi'ne. Ben de İDA'ya ve Halkla İlişkiler bölümümüze, Barika Hocama çok teşekkür ederek başlamak istiyorum. Tabii ki bu fikir İDA'dan geldi. Biz de hemen üstüne atladık, hemen kabul ettik. Çünkü İDA ile çok yakın ilişkilerimiz var ve daha da geliştirmek istediğimiz ilişkiler bunlar. Bu arada tabii ki Anıl ve Firuze'yi de anarak, onlara da teşekkür ederek başlamak istiyorum. Şu anda Türkiye'nin ilk enerji santralindesiniz. Artık başka türden bir enerji üreten bir mekandasınız. Umarım bu enerji, bu güzel konferansa da yansır. Ben bu açılış konuşmasında bir süredir düşündüğüm ve bir türlü yazmaya fırsat bulamadığım bir konuyla ilgili, bir fikirle ilgili kısa bir konuşma yapmak istiyorum. İngilizce olarak başladım yazmaya. Bu nedenle açılış konuşması diyebileceğiniz şey İngilizce olacak. Ama sanırım yabancı dili Fransızca ya da Swahili olanlar takabilir translation aletinden diyerek izninizle konuşmama geçmek istiyorum. Konuşmamın başlığı Ethics of Decision Making versus Ethics of Option Making. So I will switch to English at this point. So for our foreign guests, they can remove their earphones. So this is a pre-talk. So please forgive me for any lack of references or any serious academic markings in my talk. And I will have to read it, so I cannot say it off my head, speak off my head. So ethical problems, ethics of decision making versus ethics of option making. Ethical problems are generally defined in terms of making a choice between alternatives. To be more precise, what is usually the case is a choice between good and bad options. In this respect, decision making is attributed a critical role in many discussions of ethics. In professional life, when real issues knock the door, you will always have someone asking you the question, is it ethical to do so? In fact, there is a considerable amount of literature in the field of business ethics only dealing with the issue of decision making. So the entire effort in business ethics seems to be focused on decision-making moment. The problem is that when you need to take action on some issue, more often than not, you do not have time, courage, resources, or supporters to let you cast your decision against an ethical frame. Worst of all, you do not have alternatives or enough number of alternatives. What if we set aside the issue of ethical decision-making and focus on the ethics of option making? In this brief talk, I'd like to see the ethical decision-making problem in professional life, life in general, in fact, from a reverse angle and ask if an ethics of option making or an ethics of creating alternatives is possible at all. Obviously, this would mean downplaying the significance of the best course of action in a given or taken for granted framework of alternatives. Needless to say, there's a giant cloud of relativity lingering about the ethics of decision making. Do I need to speculate on the relativity of good and evil, ethical and non-ethical, useful and useless? Actually, it would be an insult to the intelligence of this distinguished audience to propose that what is good for one is bad for another. Furthermore, there is always a war between good and the most viable. As professionals, we know by heart that in nearly all cases, we vote for the most viable alternative at the cost of a perfectly recognized better. Because we do not have time, we do not have resources, we do not have courage, enough number of people supporting our decision, and most important of all, we do not have enough number of alternatives to choose from. So let us contemplate for a moment on the question if we are giving enough time to generate alternatives. During the ordinary routine of our professional life prior to the knocking sound of a real issue which forces us to make the best decision. There are a number of disadvantages of thinking only in terms of the ethics of decision making. First of all, choosing one of the pre-given alternatives presupposes the existence of an external system immune to the decision maker's intervention. Secondly, the ethics of decision making attributes the surrounding conditions a sense of false materiality. Thirdly, an ethical stance that narrows its perspective down to the choices alone is deeply problematic in the sense that it alleviates the notion of responsibility on the part of the decision maker. And finally, reducing ethics to decision making merely focuses on instances and does not take the process into account enough. So let me briefly explain what I mean by these. Immunity of external system. As I've been telling from the beginning, overstressing the moment of decision in an ethical discussion relies on the assumption that our actions or decisions exist in vacuum. This is badly reductionist, because when examined from a wider perspective, it will be realized that the external conditions are woven by previous decisions we made, among, of course, many other conditions. In other words, in real situation, decisions give birth to conditions of future decisions to come. Thus, attributing any sort of immunity to external conditions, or we love this word, the system, does not make much sense. As I said, among a number of other factors, it is us who shape the conditions that lay the ground for instantaneous decisions. This factual shortcoming results in a sentiment of despair. What can I do? These are the only alternatives I have, and I had to choose one of them. So when we come to the false materiality issue, when we choose to the options among a number of possible ones, usually reduced to two, we justify our action by referring to the material conditions. In other words, we freeze external framework of factors and put them in the icebox of material conditions. Then we complain, how am I supposed to change the world? This complaint supposes the external world as if it is made out of steel and always by someone else. As mentioned before, we should never forget that the real world does not suddenly pop up in front of us begging for a tough decision. I'd not want to turn back to an old discussion here, but even if the material conditions, even if the material conditions determine how we think and act, the material conditions themselves are product of processes that we are deeply involved in. Following the disadvantages of immunity of external system and false materiality, I'd like to mention a consecutive disadvantage that hangs over any decision maker's head like the sword of Damocles. This is about the sense of responsibility. When we define material and immune conditions outside the domain of decision, we also remove the burden of responsibility from our shoulders. As you know very well, that no responsibility, no ethics. The decisions made under such conditions will not be decisions in any serious sense of the word. Bearing no responsibility and transferring the option generation ethics to the others would practically mean removal of ethics from the decision-making situation. Finally, I'd like to talk about instance versus process. All three disadvantages stem from one major difference between ethics of decision-making and what I call the ethics of option-making, or option generation. In the former, what we have is an instant of choice, while in the latter, we are talking about a process. A process woven by many previous decisions, written and unwritten rules, a body of knowledge, in short, professional life itself with its entire complexity and flux. I'm aware of the difficulties, even the aporia, involved in transferring the ethics to the outside of decision-making realm, where the kernel of responsibility resides. Outside, in this context, means the realm that which imposes its demands on the decision maker. It's the realm of the other, the irreducible stranger to the decision maker. The decision maker almost always decides for the other. Decision is a type of relationship with the other who is concerned with the actual subject matter of the decision. In other words, as the result of our decisions, there emerges a change in the lives of other people. It should be noted with all clarity that established ethical rules, which are supposed to guarantee the rights of the others, does not offer any solution to the irreducibility of self-other relationship. Because decisions made on the basis of established rules of ethics are not real decisions. You just have to choose one of the options that are given to you. So you can kind of relate to this proposition by imagining a situation in a courtroom. You know, we have laws, the judges have all the rules written down in front of them, but there's this moment of decision where the judges have to interpret the rules. So, and that is the critical moment. Otherwise, we wouldn't need any judge or any court system. So these are not real decisions and does not bear any sort of real ethical responsibility on the part of the decision maker. What is crucial in this conjuncture is that the decisions made according to an immune and material outside render the responsibility of the matter of a matter for the other, and thus cannot be considered real decisions. This is the last page. Don't worry. So I always wonder how many pages will go on and on. So this is the last one. So the question is, what needs to be done? Focusing on the process rather than the instance is defined as the actual basis for ethics of option making. In this respect, ethics ceases to be an action of an individual who hears the knocking sound of decision. Ethics is a matter of entire group of people, as Essa very well put it in his opening speech, with all of its divergences, differences, interests, conflicts, and contradictions. The need for a decision always emerges out of these perils, and as professionals, we need to be experiencing the threats and rewards of such a daily routine called life. Those who are in the position of decision making then have to work as professional option makers in life. This is difficult and requires a constant awareness of a flux, yielding only occasional moments for decision making. What I mean to say, to make the long story short, is don't wait until the last moment. The moment of decision is not the realm of ethics. Being ethical, so to speak, is being ethical all along. Thank you very much for your patience, and I wish a wonderful and successful conference to all. Thank you.